Here.
Leon Fine,
Here.
Elena Flowers. Elena, I think you're on mute. All right, I will come back to you. Judy Gass and Larry Goldstein.
Yep, here.
David Higgins. Right. David, I think you're on mute. I'll come back to you. Vito Bassiani.
Here.
Pat Levitt, Chris Miaskowski, Carol Watson, Keith Yamamoto.
Here.
Elena Flowers. Okay.
Here.
David Higgins. Right. David, we do see you, but we do have quorum, Mark and Larry.
Okay, so we have one order of business today, which is Rosa is going to give us an update on her efforts on the strategic plan, as well as incorporating progress in the Neuro Task Force into a format consistent with the strategic plan. But before Rosa starts, JT has a few remarks he wants to make, and I will turn off my microphone.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Good morning, members of the Science Subcommittee. Just wanted to sort of set the stage for Rosa, just to recap a bit where we've been the last few months. You will recall that beginning in January, the Science Subcommittee specifically tasked the team to develop a reprioritized proposal for how we should proceed with deploying the balance of the Prop 14 funds, given the very large increase in grant applications that came in over a 3-month period over the winter time frame. And the team has been busily at work doing just that, and it's resulted in a process which we call the Strategic Allocation Format, SAF, and that was a topic that Rosa presented on at the March ICOC meeting. In that meeting, she set forth a timeline for this prioritization process, which includes many steps leading up to the presentation of recommendations to the full board at its September meeting. Part and parcel of that timeline is a number of meetings with the Science Subcommittee to outline the progress being made by our task force of leadership team members that has been diligently working on this. At the same time, under Larry's guidance, the Neuro Task Force has been busily developing its game plan for where to put its $1.5 billion, or more specifically, the 1.1 plus that remains of the $1.5 billion mandated to be put into Neuro by Prop 14. And that Neuro Task Force has been meeting over the last year plus, had a number of meetings, the most recent of which was last week. And at that meeting, Rosa presented to the Neuro Task Force a progress report on how things have been going in the meetings that Larry has led. And in so doing, given that the Neuro Task Force effort is a subset of the larger prioritization process, put forth a presentation that was in the same format as the larger framework presentation is that you will see today. And so what she's going to talk to you all about is to walk you through where the larger framework effort is, and then how the two efforts dovetail into something going forward that will make for a cohesive whole in the comprehensive reprioritization process. So that's a lead in to Rosa, and without further ado, I will turn it over to her.
Thank you, JT. Can everybody hear me? Because I'm happy. So hopefully it's going to be okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Goldstein, Mr. Fisher-Colbury, as co-chairs of the board, thank you for inviting us to present, as co-chairs of the Science Subcommittee, to present this update, and also members of the Science Subcommittee. As JT just mentioned, we are going to present an update on where we are with this strategic allocation framework and the next steps next. So the goals for today are twofold. In the first instance, we will provide an overview of the process that we presented at the March ICOC. This is also just as a refresher as well. And we will go over a specific example of the process to illustrate our approach to the rest of the strategic impact goals to exemplify our methodology. The second goal today is to discuss the proposal to coordinate the discussions happening at the level of the strategic prioritization within the Neuro Task Force with the ones happening at the level of the Science Subcommittee, which is this meeting today, and a timeline for how this could work. Next slide. This is a slide showing the overview of today's presentation. We will have some background, then an update since March 28th ICOC, where we will present the process overview and the example, and then a discussion of the next steps. Next. And next. So this is an updated timeline showing the ICOC, Science Subcommittee, and Neuro Task Force meetings scheduled from now till September, where the strategic allocation framework recommendations could be coming to the board. As a reminder, the strategic allocation framework process was presented to the March Science Subcommittee and ICOC, as JT already mentioned. And since then, the formation of an internal strategic allocation framework analysis group was started under CIRM's leadership guidance with the goal to collect and analyze data that will support our recommendations to the board in September. This chart provides an overview of all the proposed meetings between September and today. And at the end at the June ICOC, the team at CIRM will be providing an update on the strategic allocation framework analysis and propose an interim fiscal year 24-25 research budget, as well as a full fiscal year 24-25 operations budget to the board for approval, with a look towards the final strategic allocation framework recommendations coming to the board for approval in September. Today, we are presenting an update on where we are, and we'll present, as I mentioned, an example to illustrate our approach to the rest of the strategic impact goal. Given how we presented this during the last Neuro Task Force, we are using them to exemplify our methodology. However, as a reminder, these are just examples. Next slide. As we move on to the next critical component of our strategic planning, we face a pivotal design questions at the heart of our strategic allocation framework, which are here. We are focusing on two key determinators that will guide CIRM's future impact and resource distribution. Our task is to figure out how we can use CIRM resources to make the biggest difference. So how can CIRM make the greatest impact on its mission, and how we will CIRM effectively allocate its remaining budget of $3.54 billion. And as a subset of this, how might CIRM effectively allocate its remaining Neuro budget of $1.11 billion. So the Neuro Task Force is focused on that last question, and obviously they are both need to be synchronized. Next slide. Again, this we presented back at the ICOC and the Science Subcommittee back in March, but I want to make sure that we have a reminder of what the process consists in, as we are going to be doing this over the next few months. The strategic allocation framework is a structured and data-driven approach to prioritize resource allocation and provide further granularity in terms of impact goals and their success measures, ultimately leading to recommendations for continued implementation of CIRM's strategic plan. The following is a reminder of the process that our team is integrally involved for the strategic allocation framework. This process begins with the definition of our impact goals with measurable success metrics. These are the guidelines of all our efforts and aligned with our strategic plan. And they articulate the desired outcomes and milestones that we will aim to achieve, ensuring that every dollar allocated moves us closer to our vision. During today's presentation, the goals will be presenting as categories. And we are doing this because up until we have the relevant data and preliminary recommendations to share, we will not be presenting the goals, we will be presenting categories. From there, the next phase involves formulating guiding questions. These questions are designed to probe deeply into the potential impact, the feasibility, and alignment with our mission. And they serve as a critical tool for decision-making, helping to clarify objectives and refine our strategic direction. And you will see an example of this today. Data collection and analysis is the third critical phase in this framework, and we will gather comprehensive data at this stage and conduct rigorous analysis to understand the landscape, evaluate opportunities, assess risks, etc. And this step is essential to making informed decisions that are backed by empirical evidence. And finally, in September, we will arrive to the CIRM recommendations. This is where the insights from our analysis will coalesce into strategic directives. And when I say in September, we will obviously be discussing these recommendations before September. What I meant is that we will be presenting the final recommendations at the September ICOC. The goal of the recommendations is to steer investments towards the most promising research and development areas, with the ultimate goal of maximizing the impact of our funding. Given Props 14 location for neuro and how approximately 33% of our funding is in neuro, the Neuro Task Force strategic allocation framework exercise will inform specific aspects of the recommendations. Next, thank you, Sarah. So now we are going to go into the specific examples with the update from March 28th, ICOC. Next slide. And we are going to focus on what are the categories. Next slide. These categories, they are derived from our strategic plan. So there's nothing new here. The first one is cell and gene therapy approvals is going to be one of the goals that we will have as an impact goal defined. That's the goal number one. The second one is around accessibility and affordability of CIRM-funded cell and gene therapies. Obviously, that's mandated by Prop 14, and it's a very important aspect of our funding and mission. The third one is discovery of novel disease mechanisms. And the fourth category and impact goal will be focused around diverse workforce and development. Next slide. So as an example, the next slides, the next three slides actually will represent an example of the neuro questions as well as the data analysis slides. And these are, again, included only as an example to illustrate how the approach to the rest of the strategic impact goals will be done. Given how we presented these a few days ago at the Neuro Task Force, we are using them to exemplify our methodology. Next slide. So these are the high-level questions for the neuro prioritization. So the first one is, should any areas of neuro be singled out for enhanced funding? The second could be around portfolio reassessments. What criteria should guide any revisions to our funding portfolio and what adjustments might be needed? In terms of a strategic direction in research phases, how should we delineate our focus between translational, clinical, and discovery stages within neuro research? And the fourth question has to do around a special funding allocation. What proportion of our neuro budget should be earmarked for task force identified initiatives, and if so, which? And in terms of the neuro task force scope, beyond the fields of neurodegeneration, neuroinjury, which includes stroke and TBI, and traumatic brain injury, and neurodevelopment, are the other areas that the Neuro Task Force should consider before finalizing our plan? And what process should we be following? What degree of specificity should we include in our proposed plan to the Science Subcommittee and the ICOC? So that could be the very high-level questions that were posed through the Neuro Task Force, and that could be framing the strategic allocation framework within Neuro for CIRM. Next slide. So in order to answer these questions, we need a data collection and analysis that the CIRM team is obtaining through this strategic allocation framework analysis team. The next slide shows the type of analysis that we would need in order to do to answer these questions. Next slide. So for the focused neuro investment, we would need to understand what is the prevalence and burden of neurological conditions in California, current research funding and gap field, expert input on emerging areas within neuroscience and on clinical applications with high potential for breakthroughs. And we are having this through the Neuro Task Force. We have been hearing about the fields of certain fields from neurodegeneration, from experts in Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and Huntington's disease. And we are going to hear about from other experts, but we are also going to gather these other ways. The portfolio reassessment, we need to evaluate the current funding portfolio with.
Rosa, you're breaking up pretty badly.
Research disease areas,
Rosa?
methodologies.
Rosa?
Rosa? Could you
Yeah?
turn out video? The audio is coming in and out. Would you mind turning out video to help with the connection and audio? Okay. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Okay.
I can.
Yes,
Can you hear
yes.
me?
Yes, much better. Thank you.
I'm actually logging in with my phone. Can you still hear me?
Yes, Rosa.
Yes.
Okay, hear me, I'm just gonna cancel this and I'll keep going as I was doing. Okay, so we were in the portfolio reassessment. Do let me know if I'm breaking out. Analysis, we need to do analysis of the effectiveness and impact of past investments in neuro within our portfolio at different levels, from discovery, development candidates that have gone into translation, to our clinical portfolio, which has a very large investment in rare diseases of neuro. Comparative analysis of funding portfolios and strategies with other peer organizations, and data on industry trends and alignment with the strategic health priorities. Just as a clarification, we are already doing some of these analyses for the larger strategic allocation framework, so the neuro will be a subset of this. In terms of strategic direction in research phases, we need to review the landscape, the current landscape of translation and clinical and discovery research in neuroscience and neuromedicine. It will help us delineate our focus between the different stages of research. Next slide. So in terms of special initiatives, funding allocation, the types of data that we need to gather will help us identify potential high impact initiatives. We will need to assess the feasibility, the novelty, the cost, and the potential impact of those initiatives, and evaluate the alignment of each project with the overall goals and priorities of the Neuro Task Force. In terms of the Neuro Task Force scope, we need to do a landscape analysis of the current research in neuroscience beyond neurodegeneration, neurodevelopment, and neuroinjury, and identified underfunded areas and phases with high potential impact. and evaluate consensus statements or position papers from leading neuroscience research bodies. And in terms of the process to do that, we will be referring to the strategic allocation process, as I mentioned. This is a parallel process to what we are doing with the larger strategic allocation. Next slide. Am I okay? Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So as mentioned during the introduction, the second goal today is to discuss the proposal to coordinate the discussions happening at the level of a strategic prioritization within the Neuro Task Force, with the ones happening at the level of the Science Subcommittee, and then a timeline for how this could work. Next slide. As you recall from the timeline that we reviewed earlier on, I don't know what happened there. This should be, there you go. We have a series of important dates and milestones ahead of us. And the main point of our proposal is to streamline our efforts by merging the Neuro Task Force and the Science Subcommittee meetings between now and September. And those are the ones that you can see in orange at the top between June and September. This integration is not only about efficiency, it's about synergy, ensuring that the insights and decisions from both groups are fully aligned and mutually informed. By combining these meetings, we will be able to enhance communication, reduce redundancy, and accelerate decision-making processes. And I think this will empower us to move forward more cohesively and make the most of the limited time that we have between now and September. This strategy will help us be more agile, I think. So next slide provides a summary building on the foundation of our timeline that you've just seen and the integration of both the task force and the subcommittee meetings. This slide provides a summary of the specifics of how we can maximize the potential of these combined meetings moving forward. We could start in June, before the June ICOC. There would be a joint meeting between the Neuro Task Force and the Science Subcommittee where we could discuss the summaries from the Neuro Task Force recent neurodegenerative informative sessions. As I mentioned, we've heard AD, ALS, PD, and Huntington's disease. And for that, we've created summary slides. We presented an example at last week during the Neuro Task Force, where we have the key questions, the key gaps identified by each of these speakers, and how could potentially CIRM tackle those gaps. So that will be presented at that meeting. We will review relevant questions and recommendations arising from these summaries, and we'll have a discussion. And then we'll provide a high-level overview of how this fits within the strategic analysis framework. At the ICOC in June, we could provide an update on the process, aligning with the June Neuro Task Force Science Subcommittee meeting, basically a summary of what we presented at the June Science Subcommittee and Neuro Task Force meetings. And we could offer an example of analysis that will inform recommendations, a little bit like we did today, but a more expanded and more granular. At the July Neuro Task Force Science Subcommittee meeting here, we would start with a specific goals. So then we would start with the third goal. The order of the goals has to do with where we think we will be in terms of having moved forward with the goals. So number 3 has to do more with discovery research. We think that it will take less for us to have the data to provide an initial recommendation, and that's why we start with the number 3. So we will present the overarching third goal and review the data associated with that goal and discuss the potential recommendations for this goal, getting feedback from. Then we would go to the August Neuro Task Force Science Subcommittee, where we would present updates based on the feedback received on goal 3, the one dealing with discovery. And then we could go and introduce goal number 1, which has to do with the cell and gene therapies. And we could define the impact, the measurable success on when we present it, and then discuss the associated data and the potential recommendations for this goal. Then at the September Neuro Task Force Science Subcommittee, which will come before the final September ICOC with the final recommendations. In that Science Subcommittee Neuro Task Force, we will present updates based on the feedback received on Goal 1, and then focus on Goals 2 and 4, which have to do with accessibility and affordability and the workforce development together, and discuss the strategies and data relevant to both. And then we could go into the September ICOC with an overall presentation of all the recommendations one by one. And with that, I finished my presentation, and I am open for, we are open for questions. Obviously, this is just not only me, I'm just representing a leadership team effort here. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. That was quite illuminating. So do we have questions from the scientific subcommittee about what Rosa has laid out as a proposal for how we will deal with the coming month's meetings? So let me get us rolling, because I still have a few questions that I feel are unanswered. So my first question is, I understand how we've operated the Neuro Task Force. We've brought experts in. They've told us about things that were different than at least what I thought we knew, because there's been rapid progress in these areas. Are you proposing that in some way other areas of science and medicine will receive the same careful evaluation, both of the portfolio of our past projects as well as what experts in the field think is the most current estimate of what's coming down the pipe?
Rosa?
Yes, JP?
I was just going to say, Larry, I think obviously there are sort of countless different conditions we could have presentations on. I think the purpose of these meetings going forward, after we get through this initial set of very informative talks that you have pulled together, is to get into the discussions more directly on the goals and the underlying questions themselves, rather than following the presentation format. Because there's going to be plenty of issues for the combined Science Subcommittee and Neuro Task Force to discuss going forward, to drive us towards how we are going to make the final recommendations. So that would be my thought. Rosa, what do you think?
I agree. Yes. So yeah. So if we went through the individual talks, we could not be able to have recommendations by September. We are going to streamline all these analyses using different sources of information and analysis, market research, landscape analysis, and consulting with the stakeholders, but not in this format, because otherwise we will not be able to gather all the information. I think I just said the same as JT, but a bit more expanded.
So you think that without consulting experts in the field, you can nonetheless distill from your resources what the most current ideas and breakthroughs are in a number of these fields? Is that my correct understanding?
No, just a slight modification. JT, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would say, Larry, that we're going to be doing a lot of groundwork, which could include discussions with experts. But I think what we're saying is that in terms of the actual meetings that we're going to have, we would not have the presentation format. But that doesn't mean that in the very considerable amount of due diligence and data collection and analysis that we're undergoing, that we wouldn't be talking to those to discern trends, latest developments, and that sort of thing as well. Rosa?
Yes, I just was going to clarify that we definitely need to gather input from external input, but the change will be the format in which we do it. We are going to streamline that process.
And then I guess my second question has to do with how the Neuro Task Force, part of this joint committee you're proposing, will appropriately complete what I regard as the best way for us to advance, which is following a broad discussion in the June meeting, as I understand it. We would talk about, what we thought the answers to the questions are that you posed for the neurodegenerative area, where we've just undergone a education process. But for neuroinjury and neurodevelopment and related matters, I think, my view would be that we should use the July meeting to bring experts in so that we can educate ourselves about the most recent ideas and findings in those areas. But I don't actually understand from your, well, I guess I'm worried from what you've presented about what the topic of the July meeting would be, that we won't be able to do that. Or am I misunderstanding what you're proposing?
Rosa,
No,
do you
you're
want-
not misunderstanding.
why
Yeah.
don't you just go ahead and take that one, Rosa, please?
So I think that we could do it, but having individual presenters between now and September I think that will not be the most effective use of our time.
Mhm.
We could have individual discussions with you and some of us, and talk to different experts between now and July, August, because by then we will have to have all this information in order to pack it for the two main goals, the two first goals, which are the ones that have more influence on the neuro. So we will have to brainstorm. I would like to hear proposals from other members. I think we can have individual conversations with experts. We've put together, we can also access, yeah, I'm just gonna stop there for now.
Well, so I don't want to just stop the discussion on my concerns, but I'm not entirely supportive of the idea that we wouldn't continue with the education effort of the task force before it developed a plan for neuro. So that's a serious concern I have, and I don't think it's been completely addressed. Questions from other members of the task force? Sorry, subcommittee.
Can I make a comment? I'm an alternate, so if I make a comment that you think is inappropriate or not quite well informed, I apologize. I have a healthy skepticism about the area of neuroscience in terms of CIRM. Of all the areas in which CIRM involves itself, I think that the one that is, and I say this openly, least likely to provide some major impact going forward is something that we should understand. I, for instance, would like to know, what have the successes been in this area up to this point? Do they point to specific lines of thought or lines of investigation which will govern not what the areas of importance are in neuroscience, but where the areas are that have achieved some level of success up to date? I don't know. I don't have information about the data, so I'm not speaking as an informed person, but I just wonder whether advances in the area of neuroscience via CRM have actually been tangible and important. So it's a sort of a slightly skeptical look at things, for which I apologize, but I think I just should express that point of view.
Thank you, Dr. Fine. And sorry, Larry, did you want to?
No, I was going to say it's an interesting question. The answer to it probably would take more time than we have
Sure.
left in this meeting. we are doing some retrospective analysis of where we've seen breakthroughs. One I would point to, I don't know if CIRM was involved in its funding, but, Tom Sudoff's demonstration that you could track a schizophrenia susceptibility locus all the way back to defects in synaptic proteins that are part of a pathway that he won the Nobel Prize for, about how the proteins of the synapse interact during transmission. I think, if we were to look at something like ALS, we would probably come to a sort of different place, that the clinical efforts have largely been unsuccessful for many groups that have worked in ALS, unfortunately,
Right.
but that the basic science, some of which CIRM is supporting, has advanced quite a bit by the identification of different mutations that cause ALS, with the, I guess, faith that knowing what the defects are, one can begin to devise therapies. Like it or not, we are mandated by Prop 14 to spend $1.5 billion in the neuro area. And so trying to inform ourselves before we develop a plan for the remaining 1.1 billion has seemed to me and others that it would be a pretty good idea, which is what we've been doing. Rosa, do you want to?
I just add something. We've done at least 3 very thorough portfolio analysis that my colleague Dr. Creasy and I have presented at different stages in the past year. And in the past year. And there's a case study, for example, of like Neurona with 6 awards from CIRM between UCSF and Neurona in the risking cell therapy for the treatment of epilepsy. We started with basic research, and they are now in phase 1/2 trial for the neural cell therapy for the treatment of epilepsy. That's one case. We have other, but I totally agree with Dr. Fine that we should do that analysis, and that is part of the questions and the analysis that I showed in a slide number 15. In number 14, that we need to evaluate the current portfolio, including the distribution across the different stages and the analysis of the effectiveness and impact of past investments. I think that's definitely right on point, and we are very aware that we need to do that. A second thing that I was thinking while we were discussing is the expert opinion. I think we can also design a survey to survey a large number of stakeholders in the field. We've been having one input from a very specific researcher that has a very specific point of view, maybe more biased towards translation, clinical, or discovery. But if we do a very well-designed survey and we can engage an external consultant to help us with the survey to make it more effective, that is also an approach that we could take that I think would help us. I mean, the key here is to be effective, and I think that that's one of the things that we could do.
Thank you, Rosa. That's a better answer than what I gave, so I appreciate it.
I have to think, my internet of all days today is not working, so I was nervous, so got it.
It's okay. Monica Carson.
Thank you. I appreciate all the viewpoints being said, and I always appreciate the explicit statements of skepticism when we go into things, because we have all of our dogmas going in. So Dr. Fine, I appreciate your viewpoint. But also, as Dr. Goldstein was saying, and we just heard about surveys, I do think that I think that we'll need some time to think about these areas and to get the task force educated. This is a real time of change in the field. Just in case it's a conflict of interest, I'm an editor of Journal of Neuroinflammation, so this is where I'm coming from in all of this. And just came from a small invite-only meeting. It's real time of change. So I think this is a time of education, especially if we're deciding where this large commitment of money is going. Definitely some things gene-based, but also replacing certain therapies to interrupt cycles of neuroinflammation. The brain has a resident immune system that's innate, that has a memory. there's now approaches to try to interrupt that memory to put it in. And this might, and I'm not saying one way should go the other, but I think that might take a little bit of time for education, because it's very clear there's a lot of competing, all good views, but competing views on how these things should go. And I think you might want to build in a little bit more time to go through some of that.
Agreed. Keith.
I would like to get a little clarification, at least for myself, on how the information gathering process from both committees is going to actually be used and deployed. So what I mean by that is, one can imagine that an exercise in defining gaps, in which, the other side of that coin, of course, is defining overlaps, defining areas that are being well explored already, might be used to say, well, we should stay away from those areas. There's plenty of work going on, and let's look for areas where there's not a lot of work going on. The flaw in that, of course, is that, and one could easily imagine investigators coming to CIRM with an idea in an area that is being very well mined, but one that is counter to the current paradigm, and could really result in a huge breakthrough that would change the direction of research in that area. Similarly, one could imagine an application coming to CIRM to address a gap area, one that this discovery effort has defined as one that is under-investigated, but it kind of reveals itself to be not productive. And the reason that the area is a gap area is that there isn't really a handhold in the key questions that would move that area forward. And so it would be judged to be a not productive proposal. Similarly, one can imagine proposals coming forth in areas that are well supported by other agencies that actually exploit, I think, some of the special features of CIRM in having this very well coordinated and integrated philosophy of control, of support rather, between the discovery and translational and clinical trials and application and approval cycle that other agencies just don't have. And so for an investigator to be able to move into that kind of a pathway really represents something significant that other agencies don't have. So even in areas that are well explored. So that really raises the question then of how will the information gathering that's going to be going on in this across the summer here, that will then be used to say, here are gap areas, here are areas that are very heavily explored. Here's a hot area that we'll be kind of watching for as we watch for applications. Will overlap areas simply be eliminated from consideration? Will gap areas be kind of reflexively adopted, even if the reason for the gap is that there's just not a handhold in that area right now, and so forth. So the question is I think the information gathering, educating ourselves, as Larry says, is really important, but we'll also have review committees of experts in these areas that will try to help us to bring some order to the way that we operate. So that's my question is a very broad and general one, but trying to understand better how this education process and information gathering is going to then turn into process and policy.
So let me take a crack at that set of questions for the neuro area, and then perhaps Rosa can tackle it for the non-neuro areas. So I think what I have imagined us doing moving forward, Keith, is that the June meeting would be a discussion of the sorts of issues you've raised. And we have some recommendations on what areas are not well developed from some of the experts that Rosa has distilled from the talks, and that's been very helpful. I think the second thing I would say about it is, as I've imagined what kind of recommendations the Neuro Task Force might make, I have imagined that, first of all, we would not make recommendations for the entire 1.1 billion. I think we would recommend that some fraction of that 1.1 billion, in my personal opinion, the majority of it, actually continue to operate through the unsolicited applications, review by experts, and then rank ordering the scores and funding what seems to be the highest priority or the best ideas. But that some amount, say a third, we would use to generally pick winners and losers, where we would do RFAs for areas that are somewhat generally defined. Rosa and I have talked about the possibility that we might not define areas at all, but define mechanism, that is, require interdisciplinary teams to get together and to ask novel questions and then to review them and prioritize them. And how to go about all of those things, I would say, are what the June task force meeting will tackle. The questions that Rosa cited are some of the ways I've thought that we should go about tackling those issues. Rosa, do you want to add for the or is JT going to do this? You got your hand up, JT. No?
Yeah. So Keith, you ask a lot of questions, very good questions that are. I think my answer would be that the framework that we have established to get to recommendations to reprioritize our spending is a very carefully considered one that contemplates a number of things on the data side that start with aggregating data on incidence and prevalence of diseases in California and evaluating where sort of the biggest need is with respect to impact on the population. That is not to say that we're not going to be factoring in diseases of many kinds, but we needed to start with a sort of a basic understanding of where CIRM can make the biggest impact pursuant to its mission. And with respect to all of that, we have these sort of projected set of goals, which we haven't finalized yet, towards which we are gathering a lot of data, both externally from many different sources, including, as Rosa and I suggested, from experts in the field across the board of all sorts of conditions, but also internally in an analysis of what we're doing at CIRM already. And by the way, on the neuro side, we've actually put out more of the $1.5 billion already on a percentage basis than Prop 14 calls to be deployed. But we want to figure out how to prioritize specifically where that goes, which has been the purpose of the Neuro Task Force. But in this instance, we spent a lot of time defining questions that can be applied to these potential goals that we're looking at. They're going to get to all sorts of answers to things like what you're asking, but many, many other questions as well. And so it's a very sort of linear strategic process that we're undertaking that through the discussions we'll be having with this subcommittee and the Neuro Task Force and combined meetings going forward, we're going to address the very things that you asked, plus a whole lot more. And at the end of the day, we're going to end up informed by the data that we collect that can guide us to establish precisely the recommendations on all these things that we're going to make in September. It can't give a much better answer than that, because at this point we're just getting into the data collection phase. And so it's sort of a work in progress, but everything you ask is a very viable thing, but tough to come up with specifics at this point. We're in the middle of the process, and as things refine down the road, it'll become more clear through these discussions and based on all of your input. I hope that answers the question. It was sort of a tough set of questions to give a definitive response to, but I hope that's helpful.
It is. Let me just say that I've some of you know that I've chaired a internal funding program at UCSF for 24 years. I just handed it over to Joe DeRisi, so pretty good hands. This program pulls in, distributes internally about 0.5% of our total income revenue for basic research. It's the basic research funding program that is a very tiny fraction of the total income that we get from NIH grants and from internal funds and so forth. And so one could imagine that it would not really be more than a blip on the screen, that if it were to double to go to 1%, nobody would notice. And if it were to disappear and go to 0%, nobody would notice. Instead, it's considered by the investigators here as the most valuable money that they can get. So why is that? It's because we simply say to in the call for applications, tell us something that is innovative and it would not be funded by the conventional funding streams. We specifically call out the NIH. The first few years of the program, I had language in the call for proposals that said, we want ideas only that the NIH would laugh out of the room. And so we get really innovative things. It's 2 pages. Is no preliminary data. We simply ask about the idea and the impact it would have if it were to work. And investigators love it because they finally get to write down something bold that they've thought about, that they know that the NIH would never touch, but that it could really be significant and important. So that's the only criteria that we have. And so I think that the challenge that CIRM has is that they justifiably want to try to focus in specific areas. Our program doesn't do that. It's just biomedical research. So I think there's a stiffer challenge there. It's completely justified. I'm not arguing against any of that. But I'm just saying that I think that it's simply asking, what's new here? What's innovative? Why should CIRM fund it? Why shouldn't some other agency support it? Tell us that. Those questions might be relatively easy to ask of investigators. We may not agree with their answers, but that's okay. It's part of the judgment process, and I think it would help us to focus on applications that we really want to support.
And I think it's an excellent idea, and thank you for bringing that to our attention. Which, by the way, is that approach of funding where others may not necessarily go is certainly one that's guided CIRM for many years. So to have a component of the final recommendations that factors that in, I think is a very interesting idea. So thank you very much, Keith.
Agreed. That's quite helpful, Keith. And I think it'll sharpen our thinking, and we should probably get this reiterated in some way during our June meeting when we start talking about, what sorts of recommendations would we make in the neurodegenerative area, for example.
Right.
Neuropsych was sort of a little bit of a slam dunk since we had no presence, and it was obvious that stem cells could make a big difference in just understanding the mechanism of these terrible disorders. I want to follow up on what Monica said also. You know, I totally agree with you that neuroinflammatory processes are clearly important in the neurodegenerative area, as well as in the stroke and injury and perhaps epilepsy areas. And yes, that should be part of our discussion in June and beyond.
Larry, if you don't mind me adding, can you hear me?
Yes, Rosa, please.
So I think that the proposal from Dr. Yamamoto and from Dr. Carson, they kind of connect together, and they are very aligned with the way that we are doing the analysis. If we think about it, it's not only funding what others are not funding and that there is an opportunity. There is also the division between discovery. It doesn't mean that our discovery will need to lead to a cell therapy or gene therapy by the time that CIRM ends. What we need to have is a specific impact. Will we discover a new biomarker? Will CIRM discover a new target, a new mechanism, help like stratify autism spectrum? I'm just saying, right? Diagnose Alzheimer's, you know, with a blood biomarker for those that might not be able to, and that has an inflammatory component. I'm just saying at a high level. However, one way to do this, that this could come from the strategic discussions and the prioritization, could be, say, expand our Remind type of initiative and not focus it on one specific type of diseases, but on a mechanism, say neuroinflammation, right? And then you can bring different diseases and leverage what we get from our funded researchers without narrowing it to a specific disease, and then leveraging what other institutes and agencies are doing, right? So that's not for today's purview. That is an idea that could come from the thinking that we are gathering as we are doing this analysis, right? And it compiles what Dr. Carson is saying, what Dr. Yamamoto is bringing to the table. So those are some things that we can think about and ponder.
Yes, good points, JT and Rosa. So we are at, according to my watch, 11:28. We probably better take some public comment before we adjourn at 11:30.
There are no hands raised, Larry.
Okay, so we have a minute and a half left probably. Does anybody want to add anything to the discussion we've just had? I think it brought out a number of points and viewpoints that we're going to have to resolve a little bit behind the scenes. But no matter what, I think we'll see everybody in June for a lively discussion of the neurodegenerative area. So,
Larry, can I just add one thing before you, just to get your thoughts again? We spoke of because the paths are now parallel and intertwined of joining the Neuro Task Force and the Science Subcommittees going forward. Is that the pleasure of the co-chairs and the members of the subcommittee here?
I want to make a quick, that not joining them, they will be meeting jointly, but the two subcommittees would not be merged together. So I just want to make sure that's clear.
Much more eloquently phrased, as usual.
I don't know what the sense of the committee is, JT. I think it's, without polling, it's a little hard to tell exactly where people are. Certainly the June meeting makes sense to do jointly because we know we have a body of information we've collected. Questions have been posed about that body of information. Rosa reviewed some of them, and so that can guide our discussions in June. I think beyond June, it's less clear to me.
All right, and I'm gonna point out one scheduling note. We do still have the separate standalone Science Subcommittee meeting in May 21st. That's for the budget and the clin flow control to get that ready for the June ICOC. So I'll email everyone about a potential joint June meeting and work at that schedule, and we'll go from there.
So we can continue this discussion in May, and that might be good because it'll allow people to reflect on some of the issues we've discussed, If there's additional information from CIRM staff, Rosa and JT, perhaps it can be supplied. And I see Mark has his hand up. So Mark.
No, I think I'm with you in the context that, clearly for efficiencies for staff and for committee members, of which there's a lot of overlap between Neuro and the Science Committee, that we're in a situation where if a joint meeting makes sense to do, then we do a joint meeting for a lot of benefits across the board. And then to the extent that there might be a narrower set of topics that deserve further consideration, we can take a look at that related to the schedule. So I think we've got some latitude there. I don't think there has to be a formal immediate decision. Maybe one where we do pencil in some dates, but we continue the conversation about the inherent agenda for those activities, with the view that let's try to get fewer meetings and drive for staff efficiency and move it forward.
Great points, Mark. Okay, I suggest that we adjourn. People's calendars are full, I know, and I don't want to take any more of your time. So thank you all for attending today. Very robust.